Eventually, the weight became too much for him to bear. Lugging the Stanley Cup like a milkmaid with her yoke can work for a bit, but soon Ovi's shoulders began to ache. Sweat dribbled from beneath his 2018 Washington Capitals championship cap, smelling faintly of hops and barley. He handed the 35-pound trophy to a team official and strutted ahead, unburdened at last. Wearing a white number 8 baseball jersey with a red C stitched on the front, Ovechkin rounded a corner in the bowels of Nationals Park, greeted by rousing applause from the stadium's grounds crew. Moments earlier, surrounded by teammates and coaches on the mound, he'd airmailed the initial first pitch over Max Scherzer's head before requesting a mulligan. The second first pitch was perfectly symbolic. It took the Capitals and their captain 10 playoff tries together before finally capturing the franchise's first Stanley Cup, snapping DC's 26-year major pro sports title dry spell, and removing every asterisk affixed to Ovi's career accomplishments. 36 hours after clinching the cup against the Golden Knights, the Grade 8 barely slept beyond the flight home from Vegas when he fell asleep while big spooning hockey's holy grail. The scene of Ovechkin taking the cup from NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman was almost identical to the time Mark Messier received the cup in 1994. 24 years ago, Messier and the Rangers partied so hard through Manhattan that the Hockey Hall of Fame established its keeper of the cup position as a protective measure. Within a few hours, the Capitals were well on their way to joining them in Stanley Cup lore. After taking possession at T-Mobile Arena, the Caps paraded the trophy around the MGM Grand Casino and onto the stage at a Vegas nightclub. After the Nationals game, Ovi and company were spotted making snow angels in a public fountain, and doing cake stands from the Silver Bowl, and posing at a Georgetown restaurant with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, and leading what felt like all of Washington in sloppy renditions of We Are the Champions. Ovi didn't miss any of the Capitals' 106 regular season and postseason contests, 11 more than he'd ever played, yet somehow he seemed to gain energy as the mileage added up. He spent his off nights battling virtual foes in Fortnite, searing meats on his grill and fooling around with his black Labrador named Blake. He finished the postseason with 15 goals, tied with Crosby for the most in a single postseason over the past 2 decades. He also joined Malkin as the second Russian-born winner of the Conn Smythe Trophy. He steered the Capitals through a wild playoff run in which they became the first team ever to face deficits in all 4 rounds and then clinch each series on the road. Against Vegas, this involved stomaching an unfortunate Game 1 loss in which Ovi had an assist but managed just 2 shots on goal. Few forces seemed capable of knocking off the Knights until Ovechkin stormed the castle in all his gray-haired glory. Jamie Clark bills himself as a professional adventurer, though a more accurate title would be General Outdoor Badass. The Calgary natives crossed the Arabian Desert, summited the highest peak on each of the 7 continents, and scaled Mount Everest twice. After hearing Clark speak at a Hockey Canada event, Barry Trotz invited him to spend several days at the Capitals' preseason camp to share his expedition experiences. The metaphor couldn't have been more obvious, as Clark detailed in a lengthy presentation. He'd endured 2 failed attempts before finally conquering Everest. In 1991, sub-zero temperatures and triple-digit wind speeds forced Clark's team to turn back with only 3,000 feet left. 3 years later, and 100 yards from the finish line, a fellow climber suffered altitude sickness and required rescue. Only after trying again in 1997, and then again in 2010, did Clark succeed. Listening from his front row seat in the dark film room at the team's practice facility, Ovechkin was gripped. Over the following days, he'd periodically track down Clark, on the bus, around the rink and at team meals, to address several lingering curiosities. At the time, the Capitals were still saddled by what Clark called the penguin-shaped monkey on their backs, a wicked creature that had fattened to an all-time weight the previous spring, when Pittsburgh again eliminated Washington in the second round. As usual, blame largely fell upon Ovechkin, who scored a career-low 16 goals at even strength during the 2016-17 regular season and ended the playoffs with costly errors on both Penguins' goals in Game 7. Unable to represent Russia at the World Championships because of a hamstring injury, Ovi laid low at his beachside Miami condo and detoxed from hockey, only glancing at the score when Pittsburgh and Crosby clinched their second straight title. A few weeks later, following a wild wedding weekend back in Russia, highlighted by some shirtless dancing and a gift from his personal friend Vladimir Putin, Ovi welcomed a guest from Washington. Barry Trotz had traveled to Russia to see his son Tyson, who was teaching English several hours outside Moscow, and alerted his Russian captain of his presence. Before leaving for his honeymoon, Ovechkin scooped up Trotz in his car and steered northwest, pointing out childhood landmarks along the way. Eventually, the pair reached one of Ovi's favorite local restaurants, where they sat in a curtained section, sipped beers, discussed married life, and ate pierogies. Midway through, the coach arrived at the main reason he'd called on his star player, to tell him he had to evolve and become the athlete everyone expected him to be. On the one hand, Ovechkin remained the genetic marvel who crushed Coca-Cola and devoured spaghetti slathered in cream sauce as a pre-game meal. But he made some tweaks, like fewer Red Bulls and more micronutrient-enriched smoothies. Thanks to a cardio-heavy summer regimen featuring sprint workouts at a Northern Virginia high school track, Ovi also reported to camp in better condition than he had in years. The result was a supersonic blast from the past. Ovi became the first player in 100 years to score consecutive hat-tricks in the first 2 games of the season, and he ultimately finished 2017-18 one goal shy of scoring 50 goals for the 8th time while winning his 7th Rocket Richard Trophy. On April 16, facing a 2-game deficit after suffering consecutive overtime losses at home to start the first round, the Capitals flew to Columbus with their Stanley Cup hopes suddenly on life support. Upon arriving at the downtown Hilton, Trotz pulled Ovi aside for another one-on-one. Opening a laptop on the couch in his suite, the coach cued video clips detailing areas where number 8 could have a greater defensive impact. As Trotz explained, blocking shots or making smart exit passes would help Ovi gain street cred with his teammates. One night later, thanks to a pinball goal by Lars Eller in double overtime, the Caps captured Game 3 against Columbus and went on to close them out in 6. In round 2, the Capitals finally shook that penguin-shaped monkey, with Ovi setting up Kuznetsov for the series clincher in overtime of Game 6. All the while, Ovi emerged as a vocal leader on the bench, offering positive words of encouragement to his teammates. The Caps defeated the Lightning in 7 games in the conference finals, and took down the Golden Knights in 5 to clinch the Stanley Cup. As Ovechkin took his victory lap in Vegas, only one captaincy obligation remained. The line of celebratory succession had been plotted before Game 5, when Ovi told Nicklas Backstrom to be ready to take the cup from him since they'd been together from day one. It was a 20-year-old Ovechkin who announced the Swedish center's selection 4th overall at the 2006 NHL draft in Vancouver. And it was Backstrom who fed Ovi on the power play for the Caps' second goal in the clincher. And yet it's telling that Washington finally reached its summit with Ovi and Backstrom skating on separate lines for the first time since 2012, spending just 36 minutes and 54 seconds together at even strength over 24 playoff games. Internal tensions had run high after the Pittsburgh loss the previous spring, leading to discussions about whether the Capitals would consider soliciting trade offers for one of their core pieces. Ultimately, the Capitals stayed pat and made it to the top by adding support pieces like Devontae Smith-Pelly and Michael Kempny. After the finals, Ovechkin singled out youngsters like Jakub Vrana and Andrei Burakovsky, and fellow Russians Kuznetsov and Orlov as key pieces of the championship puzzle. Splitting their superstars also provided greater lineup balance, allowing Trotz to give Ovi offensive-minded matchups while delegating heavier checking assignments to Backstrom. Meanwhile, a tradition developed among the longtime friends. After each playoff victory, Backstrom and Ovechkin would come together in the locker room and recite the number of wins remaining before they could hoist the Stanley Cup. In 1974, before the inaugural season of the expansion Capitals, the team owners, Abe and Irene Polin, flew to Moscow in search of talent. They held several meetings with local hockey officials, offering $1 million for the rights to sign 2 players, but they ultimately returned to the States empty-handed. 44 years later, and almost 2 decades after the Polins sold the team to Ted Leonsis, Irene beamed as Ovechkin became the first Russian captain to win the Stanley Cup. NBC had its cameras glued to Ovi during the 2018 playoffs because nobody emotes like the Great 8. When Kuznetsov scored against Pittsburgh, Ovechkin closed his eyes, tilted back his head, and sighed in relief. Upon seeing goalie Braden Holtby's miraculous backdoor save on Alex Tuch in Game 2 of the finals, an astonished Ovechkin buried his head in his gloves. And as the final seconds ticked down during Game 5, Ovi prayed on the bench. A full half hour after the Nationals game ended, Ovi finally exited the suite, last to leave just like on the ice in Vegas. To his left, a few teammates headed toward the elevators. On the opposite end of the hallway, a thick horde of fans was clamoring for his attention. Mulling over his options, he turned to the right. As 2 nervous security guards hustled to catch up, Ovi approached the crowd and didn't stop. Spreading his arms wide, he walked straight into the middle, swallowed by 100 hugs, a champion embraced in full. That's all for this look back at the 2018 Washington Capitals Stanley Cup Championship. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe to support the channel.